Okay, great. So let's chat with Boaz Berney. All right, so we're going to start from the very beginning, Boaz. What made you choose the flute?
Well, I think this is one of those. I think for everybody there is kind of like an origin story, and like for me, this it was almost by mistake because I started playing when I was 6. I started playing melodica, one of those wind instrument that has a keyboard. And after 2 years, my teacher said, oh, "Okay, you are ready to move to another instrument," and I really wanted to play the clarinet. And the conservatory director did not agree because I was too young. So I had to take a year of recorder and another year of recorder. And then my next instrument that I wanted to play was flute. I don't know why. I like the sound. And again, the conservatory um, director said, no, I'm too young to play the flute. So eventually I found a teacher and just started, but I'm really not sure why. It was one of those, as an 8 or 9 year old, one of those instruments that just stuck with me. And it stuck with me ever since.
Wow. And did your director, I mean, was it like, a lot of places where there meant too many students wanting to play the flute, and so the directors always try to, draw people's attention to other instruments?
No, I, I think they just thought that kids that young couldn't start playing the flute. I don't know, it was like, your body isn't big enough to play the flute or something, but of course it's
Interesting.
nonsense. And
Yeah.
my melodica teacher really wanted me to play violin. And she's like, you should be a violin player. And I never listened to her.
Uh-huh. Oh, that's
I could
interesting.
have had
So
so much more work, really.
that's very interesting because I don't know if I've ever told you or told people about my story, how I came to the flute. And I actually wanted to learn a string instrument, but my father told me that, well, with your kind of patience, you're better off learning something easier, like the flute or clarinet.
So funny.
and so I chose the flute because also many friends were playing the flute, and this is where my band director decided try to shift people and not to have too many flutists in the ensemble. So I couldn't get a sound at all when I first started on the flute, and so he wanted me to move to clarinet, but I stuck with it. So that's my story, how I came to the flute. A much easier instrument, obviously, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and then so how did that lead to historical flutes? Because I mean, actually, that's just such a niche thing, right?
No, I was like hardcore modern flute player until I was about 18. I had eventually stumbled on a Russian school flute teacher who was really pushing me, and I was practicing 4 hours a day and playing the flute. But at the same time, I started like hearing about things like Quantz treaties and C.P. Bach, and I started reading these books, and I found them really interesting. And then I heard that like there were actually people who were playing the period instruments, like those historical instruments that Quantz is talking about. And I was like, wow, this is super cool. So when I grew up in Israel, and in the late 80s and early 90s, there was these early music workshops that were organized in Jerusalem. And all these like amazing European teachers came for a week. For them, it was a bit like a vacation. And, for us, it was just like amazing. So Martin Roth was in town, and I took a week of masterclass with him, and I was totally hooked on
Wow.
Baroque flute, and somebody lent me like some terrible, terrible rotten book copy, and just like after 3 notes I was already in love, and that was like I didn't want to do anything else after that.
That's really amazing. Can you recall what age you were
So I was
then? Or
18, and there was the other
18?
thing was
Wow.
that I had to be in the army in Israel. I had to serve for 3 years. So I couldn't practice the modern flute as much as I couldn't do my 4 hours a day because I was in some base in the middle of the desert. So I said,
Sure.
okay, this is a good chance to just try something else. So I started taking Baroque flute lessons. And I practiced, I finished my day in the army, and like at 10 o'clock in the evening, I I had like an hour to practice, like in the library of the base somewhere in the middle of the desert.
Wow. And there you
So
rushed to
that
your
was
Baroque
like my
flute.
routine. Yeah, yeah.
That's
And then like on
incredible.
the weekends, when I could go back home, I would pass through my. I had a teacher in Jerusalem, and I would pass Edith Shemer, and I would pass and take some lessons with her, and that would kind of like fuel me for another week, you know. So it was very inspiring.
Wow. And that's amazing. I mean, that's kind of early for getting acquainted with early music. I mean, I don't know if my example would be anything similar to most people. You know, usually, yeah, I of course also started out as a modern flutist and then went to college, and then it was in at Indiana University where
Mhm.
then I first had contact with early music, and yeah, and before that it was a complete unknown to me, and yeah, seems like obviously the festival uh, was a main
Yeah, it
thing
was, and
that
then I kind of hooked
propelled
up with
you.
other people who were into early music, and I had friends, and like we met once like on the Saturday. So like I would come back home on Friday, take my flute lesson, and then on Saturday it was like religiously go to my harpsichord friend place and just like sight read music, and that was my weekend away from the army. That was just like uh, I lived for that for those weekends. It was just really really inspiring.
Amazing.
Hmm.
Talking about teachers, I have a thing about mentioning important people who have guided and inspired us in our lives because I really do feel that they become a part of us and we carry that heritage somehow forward. Um, would you mind mentioning who were your important mentors, or was there
So
one person?
my first modern flute teacher, his name was Michael Weintraub, and he was this big Russian modern flutist with a big golden flute, and like first flute is this symphony, that symphony. But he was one of those make it or break it kind of thing, bordering on abuse, I would say. But he got you to practice, you know, with all these
Sure.
psychological mind, you know, games and stuff, but like really got you to practice. And I think I learned a lot from that you can get a lot done with just hard work. So that was kind of he was my first real mentor. And then of course Martin Roth, who inspired me both for flute making but also as a teacher and to pick up the instrument. My teacher in Jerusalem was Edith Shemer, and she was kind of like it was a second home for me for uh, for 4 years when I was in the army and was preparing to go to Europe. And then, of course, I would say like my biggest guru is, and you probably know this, is Wilbert Hazelzet, who was my teacher in The Hague and kind of like a second father and
For
just
all of us,
an
yes.
amazing inspiration on so many levels. Yeah, the amount of like dedication that he had to his students,
Yes.
and his like you know infinite patience and the way of teaching and idea of sound production on the flute was you know was a real important um, yeah point for me.
Yeah. Well, very nice to hear all these very different influences also
Yeah, and very
throughout your
different I
life.
think also, but it kind of makes us you know helps us start on our way and get us to where we are. I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
One second. Somebody seems like has internet issues. I didn't ask this beforehand. Is sound okay for everyone? Seems like everyone else is okay. Okay, good to see some thumbs up. Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Great.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Okay. Well, then you are also a member of a Renaissance flute consort, the Modena consort.
Hmm.
Um, Tell us a little bit about it. What makes Renaissance music so fascinating for you? Because that's also kind of that's not something you see or hear all the time.
I mean, I don't know where to start. There is so much that's. I love playing consort in general. I think it's I don't know. It's just amazing how with polyphonic music you have all these voices and each one is playing a very simple part, And then when you put it together, it's like this amazing cathedral that you're making together with these other people. And it works also like on a social level because these are usually your friends. And so with Moderna, we started when we were back in The Hague, and we're all very, very good friends. And every time we get together is such a pleasure. And I have, and also we always try to have, I mean, with Moderna, but also here in Montreal, I try to meet with people and have a regular concert meeting. We have a group that's meeting every Sunday night, and we just sight reading music and, eventually preparing a concert, but just having this experience, and of course the level of the music is so amazing.
Yes.
If you play a piece by Josquin, it's just like the top of the top. And it's the beauty is that it's very minimal and it's very simple, but it's just really beautiful when you put it all together.
And speaking of repertoire, I think maybe sometimes people underestimate there is really quite a diversity in what consorts can play.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You are not limited. You can choose any piece of vocal music that would fit the instrument. And compared to what we have with like romantic flute or with Baroque flute, that we're kind of really limited to the repertoire that's written for the instrument. Here we can just pick up almost any piece of music that was written in the 16th century, and if it fits the instrument and kind of makes sense musically, you can play it on the flutes. Yeah.
So speaking of which, I had asked you to provide a recording or two from the consort. And as one of them, you actually chose a contemporary piece entitled Vineyard in der Frühe, which means Vineyard in the Morning by Hans-Jörg Meyer, so a contemporary composer. And this is from the consort CD, Vox Delecti Mei, which translates to The Voice of My Beloved. Is that correct? Yeah. And, I'm really glad that you drew attention to this piece. Can you tell us briefly about it? What is the piece about, and how did the consort come in contact with the composer and with this
So
piece?
this was part of a bigger cycle. He wrote it's the Vox Dilectimi was a pre-existing program that was dedicated to settings of the Song of the Song of Solomon. And at some point we wanted to add a contemporary piece, and we got in touch with Hans-Jörg, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. But before that, he was very interested in the project, and so he wrote a cycle, a 5-movement or 6-movement cycle that would fit within the existing program. And so if you listen to the CD in complete, and if you can avoid listening to it on Spotify where it will cut, there are all these connections between the pieces that he wrote in. So we would finish a Renaissance piece and will move into really morph into his contemporary music. And I mean, he had an amazing philosophy of how to build these pieces. They were based on architecture, and he really imagined it kind of like beams in a big church where you connect the space with those beams. And so his piece is a contemporary setting of the Song of Songs. And he was really trying to use to see what the Renaissance flutes were capable of doing, apart from like what we traditionally do on them. And I think that's why I was interested for you to play this piece, because I think it's very different from what we're used to hearing on Renaissance flutes.
Okay. Oh, my video just disappeared. Can people still? Oh yeah, there
Yeah,
it is.
you're there.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. Okay, great. Well, without hesitation, let's take a listen. So this is Vineyard in der Frühe with all friends of ours, all people who I know, of course, Sarah von Corneval, Hiroko Suzuki, Claudio Sant'Ambrogio, and Boaz Berney on Renaissance flutes. Okay, that was Vineyard in der Früh. So I guess it's supposed to be kind of a depiction of how, a vineyard
So
in the
I should
morning. Or
perhaps introduce that particular movement. So
okay,
the whole
please.
the whole cycle talks about different aspects of the Song of Song, and there is a lot of um, images of wine and of drinking and going in the vineyards. So this one is entitled Wine. So it's kind of, for me, it's a bit like you're a little bit drunk, you're a little bit hazy. And so
Uh-huh.
Hans Jörg used a lot of quarter tone clusters. So we have to really figure out how to play all these quarter tones on the Renaissance flutes. And we just
Wow.
sat down at some point when we were just starting to work on this piece and wrote a fingering chart for quarter tones on the Renaissance flutes. And you could really get a lot of them very precisely.
Wow.
And for that, it was super cool. And it was for the ensemble also like putting us outside our comfort zone completely. I'm not very experienced with contemporary music. There were other people in the group who were much more experienced than I was. So it was very scary at start, but like once you had a fingering chart and you could figure out what a quarter tone flat looks like, and sounds like, you can try and find these colors. And this particular movement, is composed with a singer and a lute as well. But we practiced this a lot with the flutes, and we liked it so much that we just decided to on the CD you can hear both versions. There is a version with a singer, and there is a version that we just played with just the flutes. And for me, it's really great to hear what you can do with those quarter tones. And there is one moment, I don't know if you remember when you just listened, but there is one moment in the middle of the piece that all of these clusters resolve into one note. That
Mm.
note is
Hmm.
A quarter tone flat, which on the Renaissance flute, you just play a regular A, and it's already more than a quarter tone flat on the second octave. And we and that was really great because that was perfect note to resolve and to play in tune together. And then it kind of spreads out after.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I love, not just acoustically, but also the form of the composition, how it starts out, not particularly modern and, you kind of don't expect maybe much in the beginning. And then it takes a complete turn. And then, but it comes back to
Mhm.
that beginning again. So it's like,
Yeah.
coming back in a full circle yeah, acoustically, very, just, yeah, this coming back in a circle, acoustically speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very interesting project, and I feel like we learned a lot about what you can do with the instruments, and we brought that back into playing more like the regular repertoire, Renaissance repertoire, and it felt a lot more solid because we
Mhm.
really knew what the instruments were doing and what you could do with them.
So I hope you kept your fingering charts for all those quarter tone
Yeah, I have it
fingerings.
somewhere. I should put it on the website.
Is
Quarter tone fingering chart for the Renaissance
a
flute.
treasure. Don't lose them. Yes. All that hard work. Let's talk about flute making now. What made you then curious to make your own flutes?
So I'm going back to these workshops in Jerusalem. I heard about all these people in Holland that were playing their own, making instruments and playing them. There were recorder players. There were like Martin Roth was one of those people, and I think especially with the beginning of the early music movement, there was more of that happening because there weren't as many instruments available. And I thought that's like super cool. I like doing stuff, like making things. Making things out of wood, making things out of paper. Like I just loved doing this kind of things when I was a kid, and I thought that would be awesome to learn. And then when I decided to go to The Hague, I had a friend who was already there, and she was apprenticing with somebody, and I thought, yeah, that's exactly what I have to do. So I when I moved to The Hague, and I got there in August. I don't remember which year, 2004. And a week later, there was early music market in Utrecht, like an early music,
Yes.
yeah, a market
Famous
exhibition.
exhibition. Yes, a
Yeah,
festival.
exactly. And I just went from one woodwind maker to the next, recorder makers, bassoon maker, anybody who would take me and ask if they needed an apprentice.
Wow.
I was really just I had no shame. I really wanted to do it, so I went and asked people, and some people, most people said no, that they wanted to work on their own. And eventually, a recorder maker from Holland, Peter van der Poel, said he needed an assistant because the person who was there before just quit, and so that was the beginning.
Wow. Yeah. So again, you started rather early for you, this desire to make your own
Yeah,
instruments
I
and
kind of knew
with a
that
lot of
that
persistence.
was
Yeah.
something I really wanted to do, and yeah, it was just yeah, it was meant to be. I don't know. For me, it feels like that. That it was just like I just found what I was supposed to be. I was supposed to do.
That's
Yeah,
great. Well,
and
so oh, sorry, go ahead. If you want to say
yeah,
something.
so I started working for him, and then 3 months later, and I didn't have a workshop or anything. I was just working at his workshop and doing stuff for him and learning how to turn, how to make reamers, how to measure an instrument. And at this, about 3 months later, that friend of mine who was there a year before decided she's moving back to Israel and called me one morning and said, "We're moving back to Israel. Do you want to buy my lathe?" And a lathe is like, it's a big, heavy, my lathe it weighs about 500 kilos, I think. And at that point, I was just living in a room like all, students do in the beginning.
Sure.
So I'm not sure, but eventually it happened. So that's how I started, and that's how I got my first lathe.
Right. And has that been the same one, or have you
Yeah, so I still have
switched?
it back in the workshop. It's the same machine. It moved with me from these girls had it was in some shed behind her house near Utrecht, and then it moved with that to The Hague, from The Hague to Israel, and from Israel to Montreal. And it's still with me, and it's a machine that was made in Sweden in 1943,
That's
and it's
amazing.
still going strong.
Wow. So obviously, yeah, that's the one that you had
Yeah, I
in
have
The
other
Hague,
ones
and
as well, but this is kind of the one that I still use mainly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Is there a advantage in um using it? Like, why would you want to have other lathes?
Oh, I don't know.
Or
It's just like knowing it's an old friend that I know very well. It's
uh
and it's
is
all,
a
I don't know, I just also love the aesthetic of all machinery. It's like cast iron and like round. It's like nothing is square, it's all round, which makes it very difficult to like put attachments or anything else. But
mhm.
it's got so much soul in it, I feel. So,
Yeah, well,
you
just
have a
like
good,
instruments, there's
yeah,
also
just
a
like an instrument. It is a kind of
personal
an instrument.
connection.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, then my next question would be, what's your philosophy in copying instruments, and how do you decide which flute to copy? Because there's so many instruments, right? How do you decide what you want to?
Yeah, there are a lot of instruments, but I think also it has to be an exceptional instrument in some way. And since I'm a player, those instruments have to really appeal to me. I feel like that I really have to feel that this is something that's appealing to me. So most of the models that I choose, I don't necessarily choose them just because of commercial reasons, because I say, this is something that will sell well. Of course, it's something that I think about, but I also think that it should be something that's historically important and maybe not always so well known. So I've always tried to move away from the models that were most copied. So when I just started, it was the Rothenbergs and the Palancas and the Grenzers that everybody was copying. So my first copy was a Tomalot,
Mhm.
um, because I felt that this was a very, very important maker in the 18th century that almost nobody was making a copy. So I started with that. And I've always, I mean, with the instruments I make, I've always tried to find those unknown instruments in museums and kind of bring them out to the light, make a copy, and try and convince people that they should try, try a tortoise instead of a Grenzer, or try a Stainsby instead of a Rothenburg, or, just vary it up a little bit. And I
Nice.
think
Yeah.
things have gotten, I mean, a lot better in that sense that we see a lot of more variety in what people are playing these days. So that's really great.
Yeah, and thanks for doing that. I think it also maybe gives you kind of an edge in the market, and it certainly brings variety to the market and choices that we flutists have
Mhm.
in purchasing an instrument. Um, I read on your website this quote that you wrote, uncovering the concept behind an original as a way to honor the past maker's craftsmanship. And I find that to be really inspiring. And for me as a player, I translate that further to discovering the unique qualities of an original instrument as a way to gain insight into earlier music. So, and I think there's definitely a close connection between players and makers of and instrument makers. And you happen to embody both of those identities, which is a unique asset, I think.
Yeah, that's a advantage, I guess, and a disadvantage as well because I think I make my instruments the way I play them. So
Mm,
if you, it's not necessarily that you have to play like me when you're playing the instruments, but
mm.
if your playing is very different from me, sometimes you will not appreciate the copies that I make. So that's or the choice I make in models, and I accept that. It's also I feel that not everybody has to be my client because everybody has a different taste and a different way of playing the flute. But I feel like if you perhaps if you're more of an amateur flute player, because we know a lot of makers who play the flute but are not professional players, you kind of tend to make instruments that are more general, that more people can enjoy and are easier to play. And I feel like my instruments are perhaps not the easiest to play for that reason. Um,
Is there one flute that holds a special place in your catalog?
um, I mean, they're all my babies. They're all,
You
I think
can mention a couple if it's too
if
hard
I
to
had
say.
to choose one, I think this would be this one, which is my missing link Naust model.
Right. Yeah, tell us about that.
So that's kind of like also like a great story because I went I had this mission to like try and measure as many Naust instruments as I could, and I'm still, I think I've seen 10 or 9 out of the 11 surviving instruments so far. And there was this one collector in Boston who had somebody told me he had one of those, and I went to see him in his house, and he's got this beautiful big house, and like it's an old house, and it's full of instruments. He's not just a flute collector; he collects keyboard instruments and all sorts of woodwinds, and everything is just top quality, just amazing. And I was like stunned, and then he shows me this NAS that he has, and I'm looking at it, and it's very interesting, and a lot of cracks, and probably not a copying model, but like just really interesting instrument to see. And then he gives me the tour of the collection, and he uh, he showed me other instruments, and then towards the end, he's like, "Oh, let me show you my catalog. Maybe there's something else you want to see." I was like, "Great, sure." And he showed me all the list of flutes he has, and I see a second Naus there. And I was like, "Do you have a second instrument?" And he's looking at me and he's like, "Yeah, I was hoping you're not gonna ask about that because I've lost it. I don't know where it is."
Oh,
With all the instrument that he had around,
oh.
he just didn't know where it was. And I was asking him, Do you have any photos or any more documentation?" And so he went to his computer and showed me these photos, and this is like looks like nothing else. It looks like this instrument that it's kind of between 3-part and 4-part. It's got this unusual turning in the middle.
Hmm.
It's got this extra bead, and I'm like, "Oh, you have to find it. We have to find it. This is something. This is the missing link. This is like something that no, there is nothing else like this instrument." So then he's intrigued as well. He's like, "Okay, let's go and look for it." So we go into his storage area, and we open every case, and there were hundreds of flute cases in there.
Wow.
We open everything, and we look on all the shelves and in all the display cases, and we're talking about hundreds of instruments, and we're looking around. And then he had on the floor of the woodwind room, there was this shag carpet, like kind of like sea blue shag carpet and a heater on the side. And then my partner Kim was there, and she saw this flute on the floor, and she was like, "Oh, is this it?" And he's go, "Oh yeah, there it is." The flute was on the carpet next to the heater
Oh my
in
God.
parts, just without a case or anything. And he was like, "Oh yeah, that's it, yeah." So
Oh
he
man.
didn't think much of this instrument. He thought this was a very weird flute. He thought it was a fake, and he just, he didn't give it much thought, and he just like, dumped it on the carpet. So I have a friend who calls this model the carpet noused.
Wow. That's
And
incredible.
yeah, and I spent like the next day I came back and I measured it and I made a copy. Then I went back a year later and then by that point the flute was in a very nice place in the display case. It wasn't on the carpet anymore.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So he realized it's not a fake and it's something
Yeah,
obviously
and then he understood.
worthwhile
Yeah,
to,
exactly. And so for
yeah.
me, this is actually is a very special model. Of course, because of the origin story, but not just that. It's also because it's a wonderful player. Of course, it's 398, like all the good flutes are. And it embodies the best qualities of both 4-part and 3-part instrument. And for me, if I'm going in the late at night into the workshop and just want to play a little bit, that's the instrument I usually pick up.
And what kind of music do you think would be played on
So
such a
this
flute?
is super interesting. I feel what makes it different than other 3-part instrument is that it is more flexible compared to like an autotere or an early Naust. They tend to be a little bit more primitive in the design. The bore isn't quite as conical. It's more of a sometimes step cylinders or just very short conicity in the middle. And so you get an instrument that is not, I feel personally, not as flexible as the music that is written for it. Like if you think about early French music, you need all these like tone colors, and I've always felt that on a real 3-part instrument, it's a little bit difficult to produce.
Mhm.
And that instrument has already a bore that comes closer to a 4-part instrument.
Mhm.
But at the bottom of the instrument, so that part, the lower part of the instrument, it's still straight, like a 3-part instrument. So you get
Mhm.
very nice lower register. So it's kind of both, and I feel like you can play really anything from early French to early Bach sonatas would work really well on this instrument.
That's just very interesting. What a hybrid.
I see a lot of questions going on the form.
Yeah,
Are we going to answer
yes.
those or?
I was just about to get to them. So you have a
Okay.
question from Stephanie, and I'll just read out loud here. Do your techniques change based on the period of the instrument you're copying? And do you cast the metal parts for your keyed flutes?
So I don't know if Stephanie is asking about. Maybe Stephanie can unmute and just ask that question because is it about the techniques that I use to make it or the technique I use to measure? What kind of?
The techniques you use to make it.
Okay, so I think the basic techniques are the same. Still use a lathe, and I use a milling machine. For the keyed flutes, they require just more work and more precision in some ways because they have all these blocks that you have to mill away, and you have to fit the keys in a certain position. So for that, I try to be more precise. I've now got a CNC mill, so it's a computer operated mill, which helps me a little bit with the precision because it's really important where you put those keys. So every flute will be the same, and the position of the F key will be the same on every flute, and not here one and lower on the other one. So I think that's the only thing that changes. But I think when you're making a simple system flute, be it like an autotere or like a Naus copy or a Böhm copy, the basic techniques are the same. And for the keys, I started out with forging all of my keys, and from a lot of the models, I still do that. But as I'm getting more orders, and especially more orders for keyed flutes, I'm getting casts as well because it's just it becomes impossible to make this financially justifiable if you're making everything from scratch. It's just already it takes me 3 or 4 weeks to make a keyed flute with the casts. So if I have to make the keys as well, just another week. So I'm trying to make it a little bit more efficient.
Sure.
Somebody's
Okay.
asking to listen to
We-
the carpet mouse.
Right. Yes, there's a request for that.
So yeah, there are quite a few recordings online with Anna Besson. She recorded, I think, 1 or 2 CDs with this instrument. She recorded her brunette CD, and there is something with Clérambault cantatas. So if you want to hear like somebody who is a much better flute player than I am play this model, go and look for her recordings on YouTube and on whatever platform you listen to. So it's like dark chocolate and
Yes.
cinnamon,
very-
and I don't know.
Dark chocolate mousse, that's
Yeah,
for sure.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that dark chocolate.
Francesco, I see you have, I don't quite understand your comment or question. If you wouldn't mind grabbing the microphone and explain, that would be great.
Oh yes, I was just shocked about the story of the carpet flute.
Ah,
Oh.
I see.
Utterly shocked.
Yes,
Yeah, the missing link of the flute world on the carpet. Yes.
for sure. All right. Okay, now comes a really exciting part. And as mentioned, we've prepared a fun quiz for you all about flute care and flute maintenance. So just give me 1 second here. I'm going to do another screen share. This is where you can pull out your cell phone. And if you can scan the QR code on the left-hand side, or if you're on a browser, then just go to menti.com and use the code to get on to the page. So at the top here, we have 13 questions. So lucky 13. You can key in multiple answers, and actually there might be more than one correct answer, but we'll just talk about it at the end. And if you really can't decide, just go with your gut feeling. Okay, so I see people are already excited. That's great. So first of all about oiling. Which oil is the best one to use? Almond, raw linseed, boiled linseed, or key oil? So go ahead and grab your phone or get yourself situated on a browser and key in your answers.
Oh my God, looks like we have a strong opinion here.
Yeah, it was not supposed to show the
The results?
the results. Let's just go ahead and talk about it. Okay, so
this is super interesting to see how many people have voted for almond oil. I think it's a very popular oil. I think there isn't, like, if you go and ask different makers, you'll get different answers. So I don't think there is like the one oil that is you know a coverall for everybody. A lot of people use almond. I actually recommend raw linseed oil, and absolutely never boiled linseed, because that's an oil that's very thick and can really gum up your flute. So boiled linseed is no. But the raw linseed, which should look like kind of more straw color, like really light, is a very good oil to use, and that's the one I use and recommend for my flutes. I think people think that almond oil is a bit more forgiving. So the main difference between Team Linseed and Team Almond, almond oil does not dry usually. It penetrates the wood and it protects it by penetrating inside the grain of the wood, but it always stays a little bit liquid. Raw linseed oil is an oil that crystallizes. We have other oils like that. Tung oil is one of them that some of the Irish flute makers are using. And the way that linseed oil works, it does penetrate the wood, but it will dry and form a protective film on the surface of the wood. So the advantage for me for linseed oil is that you don't actually have to oil as much as you do with almond oil. And that eventually you get this like really nice sheen on the instrument and inside the bore, which is more important for sound production. Anecdotally, I've seen more problems with almond oil as well. Almond oil can go rancid and can get moldy, which I haven't seen as much with linseed oil. So if you're using almond oil, just make sure it is fresh. If it's and don't use too much of it. Even with almond oil, I've seen flutes that have like had rancid oil on them and really smell very bad after a while. So both are good, but just use them, follow the instructions of the maker and use them with good measure.
Okay, great. Very informative. Let's go on. When oiling, let the flute be horizontal, vertical, or doesn't matter. Okay,
It's
we
fun
can
to see all the dots.
see a tendency
Gathering,
here. So it seems like most people choose vertical. And would you say that's
Yeah, I would say, yeah. And I think
Answer?
putting them on a stand like this, especially if you have if you have a stand, that's a very good way to dry the oil and to let it absorb. It probably doesn't matter that much. I think what is really important is that you do it that it's in open air, obviously. For linseed oil, it is important to have it in an area that's not super humid because the humidity prevents the oil from drying on your instrument. So I say always if you can put it in a room where there is daylight, because the UV in the daylight is going to help you cure the oil on your flute. So yeah, indeed, put it vertical. The oil will spread more evenly throughout the bore, and then not in direct sunlight, but in a room where there is UV light. Then you already you accelerate the drying process already.
great? Thank you. Okay, so another question about oiling. What do I do with the key when oiling the flute? Put cigarette paper under the key, just oil around it, or doesn't matter? Oh, wait, actually, I can't see that. Oh, take it off, sorry.
I see a question about, while you guys are doing that, I see a question about Tomalot flute.
Yes, here, I'll read the question out loud.
Yeah,
What
perfect.
repertoire?
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah,
Katie.
what repertoire might have been played on the lot bass and other basso traversos? Has it been lost in time? And what about the flute d'amour?
Yeah, so I'll answer the bass flute first. I think we have in Baroque time, we have a lot of how can I say this, kind of dead branches in the evolutionary tree. So I think like bass flutes are one of those things. It's like people experimented with extending the family of the flute and try to make almost every important maker in the 18th century, especially French ones, try to make a bass flute. We have Lot and Deleuze. And other makers were experimenting with other size instruments like flute d'amour. And I think they were really busy with trying to extend the family of flute. For the bass flute, we really don't have repertoire. We don't have any information on what was played in it. It is an octave bass, so it means that it's in D and not in G like a bass instrument would be, or an F. Like if you play a gamba or a cello, if you play any bass line, you would need those notes. So it actually misses the lower fifths to play a real bass line at pitch. But you can always play, you can play duets, you can play Bois quintets work really, really well because it's a regular flute part an octave down. If you're playing a bass flute, a bass line on the bass flute, you have to kind of jump around a little bit because you're going to be missing that lower fifth. For the flute d'amour, we have a bit more repertoire. There are compositions by German composers, especially Graun, who was like one of those composers who were like fascinated with new instruments. So he wrote for every kind of new instrument that was out there in the 1740s. So they were used. It was, I don't know if at some point it was a kind of a more of a curiosity, but it's a lovely, lovely color, lovely tone color for the flute amour. And so I think people were experimenting with that.
Oh, thank you.
So
Okay.
we'll jump back to
Going back to the key, most people decided to take it off. Right.
very, very good. You're all very good.
What do you
Indeed,
think about the
very good.
cigarette paper thing?
Yeah, the cigarette paper, I know that some people do that. The cigarette paper will absorb the oil, but it can also transmit the oil to the key. So especially if the pad on your flute is made out of leather, which is on my copies most of the time, that's what it is. That leather eventually will gum up with oil and will harden and will not seal. So you don't want to get any oil on the pad. So that's why I strongly recommend taking off the keys. And it's also something you should be. I know some people are afraid of doing that because they're afraid of breaking their instruments. But I think it's an important skill for if you're playing historical instrument, you should be able to take off your keys to maintain your instrument, especially as you're getting to keyed flutes. Those keys will jam at some point or will get full with water or something during a concert, and you should know what to do with them. So if you have a keyed flute or if you are intending on buying a keyed flute, it's something you should get comfortable with.
Okay, just a quick comment from Francesco. PVC film, cling film, so like saran wrap, will be much better for covering keys while oiling the flutes.
Yeah, but the problem is the wood under the pad will absorb oil and then will never dry. So we really want to air out that area so that it will not seep oil into the pad. I've seen so many flutes with, pads that were like gummed up or dried or, full of oils that they weren't, or just getting sticky. You get that, everybody knows that sound. They've just oiled their flute and the pad is sticking. So if that's happening, use a little bit of alcohol and just clean your pad with a bit of alcohol and make sure that there is no oil on the flat surface under the key.
Okay, great. Paul, we'll get you a comment in just a sec. I'm going to put up the next question. How can I remove hardened oil that's gunking up my flute? Do you scrape it off? Do you use turpentine? Do you use vinegar? Or don't even try, take it to your maker. Okay, and Paul has a comment about tongue oil, which actually I have no idea what that is. In the US, tongue oil usually doesn't contain any actual tongue oil.
I didn't know
That's
that.
interesting.
So.
What is tongue, by the way?
That's a good question. I don't know what it's made from, because it's not an oil that I use very often. It's some kind of other vegetable oil that's used for finishing instrument. You can use it for finishing wood. It dries really, really hard and very, 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 very brilliant sheen. So it's used for cabinet making, and it's used on I know some musical instruments. So go Google it.
Okay. And gee, I wonder if it's called tongue oil, but it's actually not tongue oil. What could it possibly be? One of those synthetic synthetic inventions.
Somebody
right?
asked Google.
All right.
Okay. So I think most of you are not comfortable with removing hardened oil. I think it depends on like how bad it is. If it's really gummed up, and if it's in the bore, it's really hard to access. So if you have gummed up, hopefully this was not your flute that you made it happen, and you just bought a secondhand instrument when it's all gummed up inside because somebody used too much oil on it. So it depends. If it's a lot of oil and if it's in the bore and you can't access it, yes, take it to the maker if they're around and they're willing to maintain the instruments. For us, we can just re-ream the instrument to remove oil on the inside, so that will expose the wood again. And if you can't do that, you can also try to remove it with a bit of oil that's mixed with turpentine. And the turpentine that I like to use is citrus turpentine. You can get that in kind of specialized paint supply shops. Don't use just any turpentine. Don't use mineral turpentine. You want to use like the specialized fine turpentine that painters are using. So either Viennese turpentine or citrus turpentine. And then you mix that with oil, maybe half linseed oil and half the turpentine. So it's kind of diluted oil. Because just a straight turpentine on the wood, it can be a little harsh.
Mhm.
Press from the tongue tree. There you go.
Okay.
Tongue oil
Ah.
finish. Press anything. Yeah, good. Thank you for
Right.
that.
Yes, okay. Well, I'll read that. I'll read about the tongue oil in just a sec. Let's go on to the next question. Does a flute that hasn't been played on for some time need to be broken in again? Yes, no, depends on the type of wood. Okay, and the meanwhile, Andre has found out what's tongue oil. Natural tongue oil is pressed from the tongue tree. Tongue oil finish refers to anything that looks like real tongue oil, according to Wikipedia. Okay, so could be anything. Wonder if it's tongue is a traditional Chinese wood finish from a nut. I see.
Ah, see.
Wood from a nut. All right. Can't think off the top of my head. So I am Chinese, but I can't think off the top of my head what that could possibly be. Very interesting.
Oh, this is like looking very good. I think this is going in the right direction.
Okay, right. So flute that has been played on, does it need to be broken in again? Most people choose yes.
Yeah, and I think most people are right. It does depend on the type of wood. I think boxwood is less sensitive than tropical woods, like especially ebony is a wood that is extremely sensitive to humidity changes. So if you have an ebony flute, and it's one of my favorite tone woods, it's a beautiful, beautiful tone wood, but it's
Me
also
too.
very sensitive.
Oh,
So if you
yes.
have a flute that's been sitting in the cupboard for a year, yes, play it again like 20 minutes a day. Make sure that you oil it, um, and don't I think what I see a lot of people do, they have a project coming up, but they don't have time to practice until like a week before, and then they will pull that 392 flute that they haven't played for a year since the last project, and play on it for a week, and it might crack the night before the concert.
Stephanie is wondering how long, like, how long has it been, should it be sitting before you should, like if it's, how long has it been sitting so that you need to break in again?
I think it's always good to err on the side of caution. If it's an instrument that you have around for many, many years and you've played it in, then, if it sits around for a couple of months, it's not the end of the world. Try to avoid, like, on any flute that has been sitting in the cupboard for a couple of months to pick it up and play 6 hours. That's a shock for the wood. If you have an instrument like that, also, like we all have it, like, my piccolos sit and in the drawer until I need them for a project. So I always try to oil them before I start playing them. So I prepare. I know the project's coming, so I'll oil them first, and then start playing on them. And so I think if it's a really new flute and it's the second project you're doing on it, take more caution with it. If it's an older flute, you probably know it, and it can probably you can probably play it more sooner. But yeah.
What about corde de rechange?
I think corde de rechange are not as. I mean, it's also you have to kind of play them in, but the biggest problems are with head joints usually. Head joints are the part of the flute that sees the most of the moisture exchange, like differences between like being completely dry and being wet, and that's usually where we see most of the cracks.
Great, let's carry on.
Good job, very knowledgeable audience you got there.
What's a good moisture level to have in the environment for wooden flutes? 45, 50%, 70, 80%, or doesn't matter, moisture is overrated? Well, it does seem like we can also see a tendency. Most people choose the middle value, 45 to 50%.
Yeah, and I would say that's perfect. The only thing I would be careful with is, depends on also where you live. If you live in a really, really dry environment, I wouldn't exaggerate too much on the humidity side. And again, some woods are more sensitive to humidity than others. So boxwood is a relatively forgiving wood, although it will deform with humidity changes. So I had the first time I went to my wife's family is from Edmonton, and Edmonton is very cold and very dry in the winter. They are really, the houses are heated up. And I think I came to visit them in the winter. We were in Israel, and we just traveled from Israel to Edmonton in the winter. And I was really shocked to see how my flute just deformed. I had a boxwood instrument with me, and the flute, after a week there, it just really deformed. Like the bore became oval. This was a boxwood flute.
Yeah.
Did not crack, but it's just really react to that. So if you can keep your flutes, especially in colder countries, North America, on the East Coast, we have very cold winters. So it's good to have a humidifier in the room with your instruments to keep that humidity level up. And when you're traveling with a flute, especially if you're going on a plane, I usually recommend putting it inside a Ziploc bag or a plastic bag that's kind of a little thicker, so that you are protecting it, because the humidity in the cabin, when you take a long flight, is also dropping quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. I also have a very traumatic experience with a boxwood flute in Boston, Massachusetts, also dry and cold, and the middle joint ended up twisting and opened also at the tenon.
Yeah.
Very traumatic. Yes. Okay, let's go on. Again, about winter. It's a bitter cold day and you're off to rehearsal. How can I protect my flute from cracking? Play the flute immediately upon arrival to get it quickly warm. Use a heating pad to encase the flute, or carry the flute in a Ziploc bag. So Susan has a question. Do you recommend keeping your flutes in their cloth case or in the air on a stand? That's a great question.
I think it all depends on what kind of humidity, what kind of conditions you have on that stand. It's not good to keep flutes in direct sunlight on a stand for a very long time, I think. Especially some woods will really react to that, like boxwood will darken. Some exotic woods will react with UV light. So that's, for me, will be the only constraint. I have flutes here that I keep on the stand in the workshop, and some that I keep in bags. So I think as long as you keep them from direct sunlight, I don't have much preference.
Okay. And with that in mind, everybody seems to agree to carry the flute in a Ziploc
Well, we gave
bag.
we gave
it
the
away
answer,
already,
right?
That's okay, but everybody is smarter now. That's excellent.
Yeah, and
We
I think
love that.
everybody knows the trick of warming up the flute against your body when you come in from the cold. Putting it like the usual flutist trick that they put the flute off your sleeve and warm it up gradually before you play on it. So like, try to avoid playing on a flute that's ice cold, because that's recipe for disaster.
Great. Okay, off to the next question. How do I remove fungus or mold from my flute? Your flute is doomed. Use alcohol, turpentine plus oil, and soap. Oh, actually, I think Boaz maybe mentioned a little bit about that, but maybe there are more than one correct answer. Now, Jorge is asking, in the meanwhile, what happens if a flute deforms?
So if you look at the originals, a lot of them are deformed. So that means that your flute is becoming a lot more like the original. But it really depends to what extent. So like very often we see boxwood flutes that have gone banana, they've gone a little bit curved. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it will affect the sound. The main problem begins when we have deformed sockets and deformed tenons. I don't know if you can see this. So if the tenon deforms so much that it doesn't fit the socket anymore, then the tenon doesn't seal. Or it can happen the other way around. It can be that the socket has deformed and become oval. And the way that you would feel it usually is when you do this, when you're turning your head joint around, you'll feel that there's some place that's really tight and some place that's really loose. And it's normal to have a little bit of that, but if it's very loose on one end, you know that your socket is not sealing anymore. And then that would be something that a maker can try and help you with. So what I often do, I would sometimes rebore the socket or return the tenon to make it a little back to round. Sometimes you need a new part if it's very extreme. So that's something you really should watch out for, especially on a boxwood flute. I've seen that happen.
Yeah. Okay, yes, but it's not the end of the world. And like I was saying, telling my flute that was also got deformed in the middle joint, it's still in great playing condition. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
there are
It's not the end
solutions
of
to
the
that.
world.
Okay, and it's also not the end of the world to have mold on your flute, and most people went for turpentine and oil.
Yeah, so like it's interesting because we just had on the Flute History channel on Facebook. I don't know if some of you are members. There was just a discussion with somebody posted a flute that had very bad mold on it, and in the case as well. And so we were discussing how to remove it from the case and from this was a keyed flute in a hard case. And there were a couple of interesting comments. So my preferred way is turpentine and oil. You can kill it with alcohol, but you should watch out with alcohol because it dries out the wood. And so it's better if you're using alcohol, oil the flute immediately after. One of the comments that came up on the forum was that almond oil does it more than linseed. So if you're used to using almond oil, maybe that's the time. After you clean the flute, change to linseed. Because maybe if you're living in an environment where there is mold in the air, or if it's very, very humid, perhaps that's not the good oil for you to use. And then for the case, you can use some kind of a fungicide spray. They sell them, and then you can also put it out in the sun because UV light from the sun will kill the mold. So that's another good thing. Also, you can do it with your flute, but put it in not in direct sunlight, but in a place where there is UV light.
Okay, so that's all about mold. Let's go on. Here's also a popular question. How do I remove silver tarnish? You use silver polish, toothpaste, alcohol, or don't worry about it? This is a common question also for modern flutists regarding silver tarnish, and there's been a lot of discussion about, yeah, how do you remove it? And do you use silver polish for typical for tableware? And it's a common hack also to use toothpaste to remove to remove tarnish. And it would be interesting to hear what you have to say. And it seems like most people go for silver polish.
So the person that said, don't worry about it, that was me, the one person. I am usually not very concerned about it. If you feel like you need to do that, you can use silver polish. If toothpaste works for you, toothpaste is okay as well. There are also some polishing cloth that you can get sometimes for jewelry that will do that. The most important thing is, of course, remove the key from your flute when you're doing that. You don't want to get any of those products on the wood. And then, yeah, you can use this like silver, which is kind of like the Brasso silver polish, and polish your flute if you're really concerned about it. But I like the look of it, a slightly blackened key. It looks like you've played the flute, and it looks like a musical instrument that's in use. It's not a museum piece.
And well, the common concern is, however, if you use these kind of substances, whether they if they leave a residue on the key. So would you say if you decide to go that route, just make sure you really clean it up so
Yeah,
nothing is
absolutely.
left.
Yeah, and don't get any of it on the pad, obviously. Yeah. In
And
the
that
workshop,
can,
I have a polishing wheel, and if somebody comes in and they want to have the key cleaned up, or if it's really corroded, or like brass keys can get really bad, then I just run it on the polishing wheel and put rouge on it, and it's takes 5 seconds and it's shiny again.
yeah, just make sure you really clean up all the fine corners
Yeah,
and
exactly.
crevices around the keys. Okay, great. How do I remedy loose tenon thread? This is one of my favorite questions. Do you lick the thread? Do you use plumber's tape or paper or wax dental floss? So I think this is a kind of a common situation we run into where you threaded your joint, and then after a while the thread gets loose, and maybe you're in a performance situation or in a rehearsal, and how do you what's something good to have, and how can you remedy that?
Well, you didn't put like the real answer there, Teddy.
Oh
Which is
no, what's the real answer?
just ask, just add more thread.
Oops.
Putting people in a dilemma nowadays.
Oh no. Well, the world is not perfect.
Well, no, it's okay.
Well, I'll be honest to say, I do paper, but I'm also very I always make sure that I take it off immediately after playing and whatnot, because obviously the paper gets wet, and that's not great for the wood. Okay,
But
so
I'm very happy to see that the old method that I learned from Wilbert, who used to, in the middle of a lesson, just turn around and go, "Excuse me," and lick his tenon and put
really,
the
I've
tenon
never
back
seen
on.
that. I've
He
never
did
seen
that. He's
that.
like, "Excuse me," turn around, lick the thing, and put it back in.
Oh. Obviously, honestly, that idea never came to me to lick the thread.
Well, you just moisten it, and then it expands, and that will seal again.
Okay, but we kind of there are a couple people who, we have some diverse answers. Okay, so what's your verdict?
But so yeah, I mean, this, if you don't have thread with you, which you should actually have it. Like, I recommend when you have your flute bag, throw in an extra little bag with like little emergency supplies. So you have a little bit of thread that you're using for your flute. I usually use cotton thread, waxed cotton thread that I wax myself. But if you don't have access to that, just regular sewing thread is also fine. A little bit of beeswax. I saw somebody wrote that because beeswax helps stick the thread onto the tenon. And then if you're feeling adventurous, a small bottle of super glue in case of cracks, maybe small pair of pliers if you need to pull out your key. These are the kind of things you should just have with you, because you never know if something happens in a professional situation and you need to like do something to your flute. It's always good to just have on hand. So out of those answers, personally, I prefer to just like moisten the thread a little bit. I'm not a huge fan of plumber's tape. I think that it's, I don't know if it reacts with the wood or not, or there are oils in there that react with the wood. Wax dental floss is fine. The least of my favorite is paper. And what you should really be careful, this is something not a lot of people know, but like a good, how should I say? When you cut the tenon, a socket for your head joint or for your right hand joint, any socket on your flute should be a little bit conical. That means that it's bigger on this side than on the inside. So when you put it together, it really fits when it's completely closed, and it gets loose very fast. Not all makers do that. Some makers make their tenons just completely straight, cylindrical. And then the risk is that if the tenon expands in the far side, it can get stuck. And when you have paper, it can do that as well. So if you pull out the paper and get stuck to something, it can create a tenon that's wider on the inside than on the outside. And that can get stuck. If this ever happens to you, never, ever, ever force it, because that's going to crack your flute. You want to try and wiggle it around like this until eventually, or turn it and try and find a loose point. But don't just brute force it, because you're risking of cracking your socket.
And if all else fails, you just have to wait a bit.
Yeah, that's the other thing. You might have to carry that head joint on together with the left hand joint and just put it on a stand in your house, and I guarantee that that within half a day it will loosen up usually.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's some comments about that. We're going to go ahead with the next question and we'll come back to those comments.
All right,
Okay.
perfect. Excellent.
How do I fix a stuck key? Do you use pencil, lip balm, key oil, or lard? Okay, so Jose, regarding loose threads, Jose had mentioned he uses piccolo, so cork grease.
Oh, cool. Great.
And it seems like you're very well stocked with your first aid, Traverso first aid kit. That's great. And Jorge asks, would it be possible to use crayon to fix the loose thread? Crayon, I guess just
like a wax
crayon? A wax crayon?
I've never heard of it. Yeah, I suppose so, but it wouldn't be my first choice.
Wax crayon, right.
Wax crayon. I guess it could work, but it's better to just have a piece of beeswax, or cork grease is great. Yeah, even lip balm, I would say, is better than a crayon, I guess. Just in case you don't have anything else. But moistening the end, I think, works the best, and that's, we all have saliva in our mouth.
Oh, that would be not my preferred choice, to be honest. The first time I saw that, I couldn't stand it. But that's me. That's just me. Okay, so about stuck keys. Okay, a lot of people choose key oil.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I would never use key oil on a wooden flute, because key oil is meant for metal on metal. So it's meant to lubricate a metal axle inside a metal tube, or if you have size. So if you have a flute that has, for instance, I make Koch flutes, there are metal linings for your keys, on the blocks. So the side of the key is touching metal, so it's metal to metal. Yes, you can use a tiny bit of key oil, but you want to try and not get it on the rest of the flute. But on your regular Baroque flute, I would not use, when it's wood to metal, I wouldn't use key oil. So can you see my screen, or can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you. Yeah.
You can see me. So the way I would fix it, and can you see this? Is this in focus?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So you take your key, you take your pin out. So I like to use a flat nose plier. If it's something from your loved ones, Christmas present, get them to get you one of these things. Super useful for anything with a flute, and you can pull out. This happens very often that people can't pull out their pin. The wood might shrink, and the pins are usually made from very soft silver. My flutes, usually it's soft silver, so you don't want to force them. So you don't want anything that has any grooves inside on the plier. So flat nose pliers, and I just pull them. I pull it very gently. I hold on to the key so it's not jumping out, and I pulled out the pin. This is on my favorite flutes, mind you guys. And then you're gonna look for, when it's stuck, you're gonna look for places where the metal is rubbing against the wood. So if this was a boxwood flute, you'd see it. You'd see black marks where it's rubbing. So your first remedy would be to take just a regular pencil and rub it, just draw a little bit on the side. And the graphite from the pencil is gonna lubricate that a little bit and make the movement, make the key move again. And if that's not working and it gets stuck again, what's happening? This is something that happens very often with a new flute. The maker lives in one country and he sends your flute to another country, and the humidity levels are different. And when he made the flute, the key was working fine, but when you get it, the key is stuck. And that's because the humidity in your house is different from the maker's workshop. So sending the flute back to the maker is not the ideal solution. It's better to try and deal with it where you live, where your flute is living, and the humidity that your flute is living. So if the graphite is not working, I recommend using a very fine, either a needle file or a nail file, flat nail file, and just file a little bit of the side of the wood, like where you see those black marks, right here on the side where it touches the key, and just a little bit, get that restriction out of the way, and then put the key and try it again. And you need to usually you just need very little. And
Okay.
once the flute is played in, this is less likely to happen, but it can happen, you know, on a particularly humid day. And then there is, of course, like for a concert situation, there's always a rubber band, you know, which nobody likes to see that, but it is a solution for, you know, an absolute emergency. You can just wrap a rubber band around the key to make it come back.
All right. Okay, thank you for that very detailed answer. I'm gonna push forward here. How do I know when my flute needs re-reaming? When it cracks, when it sounds stuffy, is routine care no matter what, and when the bore looks dry. I'll be honest to say, I haven't had my flutes re-reamed.
Maybe I should just briefly explain about re-reaming.
Oh yeah, sure. Maybe people don't know what it means.
I'm gonna show you what a reamer is. This is a reamer. So this is the tool that I use to cut the bore, the profile of the bore in the flute. And for every model that I make, I make a set of reamer, and those will try to kind of duplicate the bore of the original when it was new. And those reamers really make the final shape of the bore, and we use them also for tuning the flute. So if there are some particular tuning problems that we cannot solve with undercutting, we might have to go and solve them with changing, you know, reaming a little bit in a certain point or less for the next time that you're making that model. And re-reaming basically means that you're gonna use those reamers and cut the wood again to the place where it was when the flute was new. So what happens is that, especially on boxwood instrument, but not only, the wood would shrink after the first year or after some time, and then so the bore is constricted. And then this is what we do: we just pass the reamers again, we scrape the bore again, and then you'll have the same shape as when the flute was new. So I see a lot of you wrote that when it sounds stuffy, and it's absolutely right. For my flutes, I offer that as a service, as a free service, and I recommend sending it to me after a year, but it's not absolutely necessary. So if your flute sounds good, if it's playing in well, if you feel like it's responsive and the tuning is the same as when you got it or better, then you can just hang on to it. For my clients, I say that they can always send the flute for re-reaming, even if it's, you know, 5 years later. But, you know, be in touch with your maker and see what they recommend. Maybe don't, yeah. But if it sounds stuffy, if you feel like it's not as responsive as it was when you got it, it's definitely time to send it back to the maker, and you'll be surprised at how amazing it will sound when you get it back.
Great. Okay, and then for the last question, I think it's actually a free, people can just type in their answers, but I think just for the interest of time, maybe Boaz can go ahead and just talk about what are some solutions, and which is, my flute just cracked and I'm about to go on stage. What do I do? Yikes.
Yeah, so this is like a nightmare situation that nobody wants to be in.
Exactly.
I personally always bring a second flute, but I know that's you know, I'm a maker, so I have always a couple other ones, but people don't always have that option. Indeed, super glue is then your best friend. So that depends where it cracked. Very often what we see, I call them kind of stress cracks, but they go like we see on the head joint very often, cracks that are on the surface of the wood. Sometimes these just will open and will not go through. If the crack doesn't go through, I would say don't touch it. Play your concert, unless it's leaking, play your concert and get it to the maker afterwards. If it's a question of like, it's cracked in the socket, like you pulled out your flute and you heard that horrible
Oh, no.
that nobody likes to hear, but happens to every flutist at least once, then you really need to do some emergency measures. It's good to have super glue in your bag for that. You can try with just a bit of super glue. If we're talking about foot joint, the foot joint doesn't have a lot of stress on the socket because there is not a lot of changes of humidity. So you can just put some super glue and hope for the best for that concert. If it's a head joint or somewhere where there's more pressure, you need to reinforce it sometimes because you put that tenon back in and it will crack open again. So a good emergency measure is to take your thread that you brought in your Traverso repair kit, and you're going to wrap it again around the cracked socket. If you can avoid the wooden part, it's better because, especially on a boxwood instrument, it will be really difficult to remove without touching the stain. If it's a black instrument, if it's an ebony or a grenadilla flute, then it doesn't matter because it's very easy to just refinish it afterwards. So you wrap it with thread and you put super glue on the thread. It's going to look terrible, but it's going to hold your crack for quite a long time. So that's a very good emergency measure. And then later on, if you take it back to the maker, they can put it on the lathe and just turn all this mess away. They'll probably turn off your ring as well, remove the ring, reinforce the socket, and put a new ring on top. So in an emergency situation, I would do that. If it's really in a socket like that, yeah.
So there is a comment from Francesco. Temporary solution would be sellotape, like a matte cellophane tape.
You could I've seen people do that as well. If it's a crack on the outside and it's leaking, if it's not a structural crack, you could do that, yes. But if it's a structural crack and you need to really hold it, then I would go for the thread and super glue.
And there's a question about how long do cracks take to form?
Well, I think it depends on the flute. I can't answer it.
Circumstances.
I've seen anything from a crack that just appeared and like over time just gradually got longer. And I've also had like somebody sitting next to me in a rehearsal and playing, and all of a sudden, a head joint split in two cleanly.
Wow.
So those are the two extremes. Yikes, indeed.
Definitely. All right. Good job, everyone. We're through with our quiz.
Yeah, very good.
Are there any other questions for Boaz which we haven't touched on today? Sorry to run over time, but on the other hand, seems like people have been very interested, and a lot of good information been put out there, as well as also exchange of ideas and information. Well, then if not, you can always feel free to email. Oh, there's one.
We forgot to talk about the future project. Yes, and I see a question about.
Andrew has a question. Would a 415 lot base be feasible?
Or Deleuze? Yeah, I could try to make corde à rechange for that because I do make my lot base at 398, but I've never experimented with that. I'm kind of a bit of a purist, and I must say I made one bass flute, and I've got now an order for another one. And I, at the moment, just make them at original pitch. Yeah. Or Deleuze. I don't know what pitch is the Deleuze. It might be the closer to 415. Yeah, it's true. another question.
Okay.
I would like to.
I own one Berney secondhand flute. I would like to know why you add a second cork layer at the bottom of the cork.
So I think what they're referring to, I don't know if it's with some of the corks that I have. So the quality of cork that we get is kind of going down, so that you can't always get the best quality. So sometimes I feel that the cork is leaking, then I might add a little bit, a sheet of cork to make sure that it's really sealing. Sometimes maybe if it was cut too short, then that can happen, then you add a little layer of cork. But it's for no musical reason. It's just it's a technical thing to get the cork in the right position, and also to get it to seal. It's very important that your cork is sealing, of course.
And where can we follow you, Boaz?
Well, I'm mostly on Facebook. I'm not super active on other platforms. So I do have a Facebook page that is updated quite regularly. There is, of course, the website. So go to Boaz Berney Historical Flutes on Facebook, and I often post photos of what's going on in the workshop, of flutes that I'm working on, or if there is any other exciting projects.
Your address is berneyflutes.com, correct?
Yeah,
want to make sure.
berneyflutes.com, yeah.
Okay, so I just put in the chat
Okay,
Boaz's
perfect,
website, berneyflutes.com. That's where you can find, that's his website. Okay, well, if you have any further questions, whether about flutes or flute maintenance, feel free to email one of us. You can email me. I can forward it to Boaz, or find Boaz directly and talk to him about it. And on this note, please give a round of applause, super round of applause emojis for Boaz Berney. Thank you so much for being with us today. And taking the time to explaining so many important details and really helpful information. Many thanks to also you, of course, dear audience, for being a part of our wonderful Traverso community. If you liked what you experienced today, consider signing up for my newsletter at teddyhuang.com. And besides event announcements, I also share tips about historical flute playing, which includes blog posts or short tutorial videos. There are a couple of events coming up in the next couple of weeks. And next Wednesday, I'll be holding a Doctor is In session where you can book a mini lesson with me and get straight to the point on whatever topic you choose. And also towards the end of the month, I'll be holding a group workshop called the Affect in Ornamentation, where I'll be talking about expressivity in Baroque ornamentation. There are more events after that. You can find all the registration info on my Eventbrite site, which you all know now. And again, feel free to contact us for any further questions. And with these words, I wish everyone a great weekend and continued happy playing.
Yeah, and thank you for hosting, Teddy. And I just want to say
my pleasure.
It's wonderful to see all these people that I know by name and through Facebook and other media. And I'm hoping to meet all of you in person one day.
Isn't that amazing? Thank you very much.
Absolutely. All right.
Thank you all. Take care. All the best.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.